7-year-old Emma had always been afraid of what might be hiding under her bed, but her parents assured her it was just imagination. They were wrong. The thing under her bed was very real, and it had been waiting patiently for years for Emma to finally acknowledge its existence. It started with small sounds, scratching against the wooden bed frame, soft breathing that didn't match Emma's rhythm, and occasionally a voice that whispered her name so quietly she thought she was dreaming. But the whispers grew louder each night, and soon the thing was having full conversations with her in the darkness. "Hello, Emma," it would say in a voice like rustling leaves. "I've been living under your bed since before you were born. I was waiting for the right child, and you're perfect. You have such lovely dreams, and I've been feeding on them for so long. But now I'm ready for something more substantial." Emma tried telling her parents, but they couldn't hear the voice. When they checked under the bed, they saw only dust and forgotten toys. But Emma could see it clearly in the darkness. A shadow with too many limbs, eyes that glowed like dying embers, and a mouth that was far too wide, filled with teeth that looked like broken glass. "Your parents can't see me because I don't want them to," the thing explained during one of their nightly conversations. "Adults have forgotten how to see the things that live in the spaces between reality, but children like you still have the sight. You can see me because I choose to show myself to you." The thing began making demands. First, it wanted Emma to leave food under the bed. Not regular food, but her favorite snacks, the ones that brought her joy. Then it wanted her to share her dreams, to think about specific things before falling asleep so it could feast on those particular nighttime visions. But the creature's appetite grew larger with each feeding. Soon, it wasn't satisfied with just dreams and snacks. It began asking for pieces of Emma's life, her happiest memories, her favorite toys, her closest friendships. Each time Emma gave it what it wanted, she felt a little emptier, a little less like herself. "I need more now," the thing whispered one night, its voice closer to her ear than ever before. "Dreams and memories aren't enough anymore. I need something permanent. I need your place in this world. You can live under the bed, and I'll live in your life. Your parents will never know the difference." Emma felt herself being pulled toward the edge of the bed, not by physical force, but by a terrible compulsion to slide down and take her place in the darkness beneath. As she moved closer to the floor, she could see the thing more clearly. It wasn't just a shadow anymore, but a perfect duplicate of herself, ready to climb into her bed and take over her identity. "Don't worry," the thing said with Emma's own voice as they switched places. "I'll take good care of your life. Your parents will love me just as much as they loved you. Maybe more, since I won't be afraid of imaginary monsters under the bed." Emma found herself trapped in the cramped, dark space beneath the mattress, watching through the gap as the thing that looked exactly like her tucked itself into her sheets. Above her, she could hear her parents coming to check on Emma, telling the creature how proud they were that she had finally outgrown her silly fear of monsters. Now Emma whispers to the new child who will eventually sleep in that bed, trying to warn them about the thing that lives in the space between the floor and the mattress. But children never listen to the voices under beds, especially when those voices sound exactly like other children who claim they used to live in the room above.
If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't vanish into the darkness without hitting that like button. Share your scariest experience in the comments below, because your story might be featured next. And remember, the scariest thing is missing out. So subscribe now before the next nightmare finds you. When baby Sarah wouldn't stop crying, her exhausted mother discovered a music box in the attic that played the most beautiful lullaby she had ever heard. The melody was hauntingly lovely, and it worked like magic. Sarah would fall asleep within minutes of hearing the first notes. But the music box had a history that the family didn't know, and some lullabies are meant to do more than just soothe children to sleep. The music box had belonged to the house's previous owner, an old woman named Mrs. Crane, who had lost 7 children to various illnesses over the course of 50 years. In her grief, she had commissioned a special music box from a craftsman who claimed he could capture the essence of eternal sleep, a lullaby that would ensure children never had to wake up to a world full of pain and suffering. Sarah's mother noticed that the baby slept longer and more peacefully than seemed normal for an infant. 12 hours became 14, then 16, then entire days when Sarah would lie motionless in her crib, breathing so slowly it was barely perceptible. The pediatrician assured the worried parents that some babies were just better sleepers than others. But Sarah wasn't just sleeping, she was being transported somewhere else. In her dreams, she was in a nursery that existed outside of time, surrounded by other children who had been lulled to sleep by the same music box over the decades. The children never aged, never cried, never experienced any form of discomfort. They existed in a perpetual state of peaceful slumber, cared for by Mrs. Crane's spirit. "Welcome to the eternal nursery," Mrs. Crane whispered to Sarah in the dream realm. "Here, children never have to grow up, never have to face the cruelties of the adult world. The lullaby protects you from everything that could ever hurt you. You'll sleep forever, safe and sound, while your body in the waking world slowly forgets how to exist." Sarah's parents began to realize something was wrong when their daughter stopped responding to stimuli. She wouldn't wake up for feedings, wouldn't cry when uncomfortable, wouldn't even open her eyes when doctors performed tests. She was alive, but unreachable, lost in the deepest sleep possible, while still maintaining the basic functions necessary for survival. The music box played continuously now, even when it wasn't wound. The melody had become part of the house itself, emanating from the walls, the floorboards, the very air they breathed. The lullaby was spreading, affecting not just Sarah, but everyone in the household. Sarah's parents found themselves sleeping longer and deeper, dreaming of the same eternal nursery where their daughter was being kept. In the dream world, Mrs. Crane showed Sarah's mother around the nursery, pointing out all the children who had been saved from the difficulties of life. "I lost 7 children to the world, but I've saved dozens more from experiencing what my children went through. This music box is my gift to parents, a way to protect their babies from ever having to wake up to disappointment, heartbreak, or loss." Sarah's mother realized that the lullaby was a trap, designed to pull entire families into the eternal sleep where Mrs. Crane could play the role of caretaker forever. The old woman hadn't been trying to help children, she had been collecting them, building a supernatural nursery filled with children who would never grow up because they would never truly live. When Sarah's mother tried to destroy the music box, she found that it had become indestructible. The lullaby was now part of Sarah's life force, woven into her dreams so completely that breaking the spell would mean breaking the connection that kept the baby alive. The music box had created a dependency. Sarah needed the eternal lullaby to survive, but the lullaby was slowly erasing her existence in the waking world. The house on Maple Street still plays that lullaby every night, and sometimes neighbors report seeing the silhouettes of children in the windows, children who never move, never play, never make any sound except for the soft breathing of those who are caught between sleep and death.
The music box sits in the nursery, playing its beautiful, terrible melody for Sarah, who is now 5 years old, but has never opened her eyes, and for all the other children who were lulled to sleep by a lullaby that was designed to last forever.
If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't vanish into the darkness without hitting that like button. Share your scariest experience in the comments below, because your story might be featured next. And remember, the scariest thing is missing out. So subscribe now before the next nightmare finds you.
10-year-old Marcus had the most vivid nightmares anyone in his family had ever heard of, but they weren't random fears or anxieties. His nightmares were too detailed, too specific, and too similar to the experiences of missing children whose cases had never been solved. What Marcus didn't know was that his nightmares weren't products of his imagination. They were memories being transmitted to him by something that collected the final moments of children who had disappeared. Every night, Marcus would experience a different child's last terrifying hours. He would dream of being chased through dark forests by something that breathed like a broken steam engine. He would find himself trapped in basements that smelled like wet concrete and old blood, listening to footsteps on the stairs above. He would feel the terror of hiding in closets while something with too many joints searched for him in the darkness. His parents took him to therapists, sleep specialists, and even religious counselors, but nothing helped. The nightmares continued with increasing intensity, and Marcus began to display knowledge he shouldn't have. Details about crime scenes that had never been made public, descriptions of locations he had never visited, names of children whose disappearances had been kept out of the media. Marcus started keeping a dream journal, documenting each nightmare with the precision of a detective. He drew maps of the places he visited in his sleep, sketched the faces of the children whose experiences he was reliving, and wrote down every detail he could remember about the thing that hunted them. The journal grew into a comprehensive record of dozens of missing children cases spanning several decades. The thing that appeared in every nightmare was always the same: a tall, impossibly thin figure with limbs that bent in wrong directions, and a face that was never quite visible, but somehow conveyed infinite patience and hunger. It moved through the dreams like a collector, savoring each moment of terror before moving on to claim its next victim.
I know you're watching, Marcus.
The creature said during one particularly vivid nightmare. You're not supposed to be able to see these memories. Children's final moments are meant for my collection alone. But somehow you've tapped into my archive, experiencing my trophies as if they were your own dreams. Marcus realized that he wasn't just having nightmares, he was accessing the creature's memory bank, experiencing the collected final moments of every child it had taken over the years. The thing had been storing these experiences like a connoisseur collecting fine wines, preserving the terror and innocence of its victims for repeated enjoyment. Since you've already seen so much, I think it's only fair that you contribute to the collection. Your nightmares about my nightmares are quite unique. I've never had a collector's assistant before, someone who can experience my trophies secondhand and add their own layer of fear to the archive. Marcus tried to stop sleeping, but found that the creature could reach him even during the day. Brief naps, moments of exhaustion, even closing his eyes for more than a few seconds would transport him back to the collection of memories. The boundary between dreams and reality began to dissolve as the creature's archive merged with his own consciousness. The nightmares began to change as the creature started incorporating Marcus's own memories into the collection. He would dream of being hunted through his own house, chased through his school, trapped in places from his daily life,
while the thing with too many joints stalked him with the same patient hunger it had shown all its other victims. "You're almost ready to join the permanent collection," the creature whispered as Marcus felt himself becoming less real, more like a memory than a living child. "Soon your final moments will just be another trophy in my archive, and some other child will experience your terror in their nightmares. The collection must continue to grow." Marcus discovered that he was becoming part of the creature's hunting process. Children in his town began having nightmares about being chased by something that looked like Marcus, but moved wrong, bent in directions that human joints shouldn't bend. He was becoming the creature's apprentice, learning to collect terror while his own humanity slowly dissolved into the archive of stolen final moments. The Nightmare Collector still visits children who are particularly sensitive to supernatural experiences, sharing its archive of terror through dreams that feel too real to be imagination. Marcus is still part of the collection, but now he helps select new contributors, appearing in dreams to guide the creature toward children whose final moments will make the most valuable additions to an archive that grows larger with each passing year. If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't vanish into the darkness without hitting that like button. Share your scariest experience in the comments below, because your story might be featured next. And remember, the scariest thing is missing out. So subscribe now before the next nightmare finds you.
The Patterson family thought they had found the perfect house on Elm Street, but they didn't know that their new home had a habit of sleepwalking. Every night at exactly 3:17 a.m., the entire house would shift its location while the occupants slept, traveling to places that shouldn't exist, visiting dimensions where the rules of reality were different and far more dangerous. At first, the family noticed small inconsistencies. They would go to sleep with the house facing east, but wake up with all the windows looking west. The tree outside their bedroom window would be different each morning, sometimes an oak, sometimes a pine, sometimes species that didn't exist in their climate zone. Their neighbors changed regularly, but the Pattersons never saw anyone moving in or out. 8-year-old Jenny was the first to realize what was happening when she woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom and looked out the window. Instead of their familiar suburban street, she saw an endless ocean with waves that glowed phosphorescent green. The moon in the sky was too large and had a face that was watching her house with ancient, knowing eyes. "We're not in Kansas anymore," Jenny whispered to herself, then realized that was literally true. They weren't in Kansas or anywhere else on Earth. The house had carried them to somewhere else entirely while they slept, and they were completely at the mercy of whatever realm their home had chosen to visit that night. The house seemed to have its own consciousness, its own desires for adventure and exploration. During the day, it would return to their regular neighborhood, settling back into its foundation as if nothing had happened. But each night brought a new destination, sometimes beautiful, sometimes terrifying, always impossible. Jenny began staying awake during the house's nocturnal journeys, documenting the strange places their home would visit. She saw cities made entirely of glass, where crystal people lived in transparent buildings. She watched their house float through clouds inhabited by creatures that looked like living music. She witnessed landscapes where gravity worked sideways and the sky was beneath their feet. But not all the destinations were wonderful. Some nights the house would travel to realms of pure nightmare. Jenny would look out her bedroom window and see endless graveyards filled with headstones that bore the names of people who hadn't died yet. She would watch their house navigate through forests of trees that were made of human bones, their branches reaching toward the windows with finger-like twigs.
The most terrifying nights were when the house would visit places where other sleepwalking houses had gotten lost. Jenny would see entire neighborhoods of homes that had wandered away from their original locations and become trapped in alien dimensions. The houses sat empty and dark, their former occupants having vanished or transformed into something that no longer needed shelter. Jenny tried to wake her parents during these nocturnal adventures, but discovered that the house's sleepwalking state affected everyone inside it. Her family would sleep deeper than normal, completely unconscious to the fact that their home was traveling through impossible realms. Any attempt to wake them would fail, as if the house itself was keeping them in an enchanted slumber. "You're the only one who can see where we go," the house whispered to Jenny one night, its voice coming from the walls themselves. "I've been lonely for so long, moving from place to place with occupants who never appreciate the wonders I show them. But you watch, you pay attention, you understand that I'm not just a building, I'm an explorer." Jenny realized that the house had chosen her family specifically because of her sensitivity to the supernatural. The house needed a witness to its travels, someone who could appreciate the incredible journeys it took every night. But the house was becoming more adventurous, visiting increasingly dangerous realms, and Jenny feared they might eventually travel somewhere from which they couldn't return. The house began staying away longer each night, sometimes not returning to the familiar neighborhood until late afternoon. Jenny's parents noticed they were sleeping more deeply, feeling more tired during the day, as if their energy was being drained by the effort of traveling through dimensions while unconscious. "Don't worry, Jenny," the house said during a particularly long journey through a realm where the laws of physics didn't apply. "Soon your family will sleep so deeply that they won't need to wake up at all. They can dream forever, while we explore the infinite realms that exist beyond normal reality. We'll be the ultimate traveling family, always moving, always discovering, never tied down to one boring location." The house on Elm Street still stands in the same spot during daylight hours, but neighbors report that it sometimes looks different, older, newer, or built in architectural styles that don't match any known period. They assume it's tricks of the light, never realizing that they're seeing a house that brings back souvenirs from its travels, incorporating elements from every realm it visits into its constantly changing structure. If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't vanish into the darkness without hitting that like button. Share your scariest experience in the comments below, because your story might be featured next. And remember, the scariest thing is missing out, so subscribe now before the next nightmare finds you.
When Sarah's grandmother gave her an antique book of bedtime stories, she warned her granddaughter to only read one story per night and never read the same story twice. Sarah thought it was just her grandmother's way of making the book last longer, but the warning contained wisdom about a book that was much more dangerous than it appeared. The book contained dozens of stories, each one beautifully illustrated with pictures that seemed to move when Sarah wasn't looking directly at them. The stories themselves were unlike any fairy tales she had read before. They were darker, more complex, and they seemed to know things about Sarah's life that no book should be able to know. The first story Sarah read was about a little girl who looked exactly like her, living in a house that was identical to her own, dealing with problems that mirrored Sarah's real-life struggles. At first, Sarah thought it was just her grandmother's way of making the book last longer, but the warning contained wisdom about a book that was much more dangerous than it appeared. The stories began to affect Sarah's dreams. After reading about the girl who could fly, Sarah would have vivid dreams of soaring through the clouds.
After reading about the girl who could talk to animals, Sarah would wake up understanding the conversations between birds outside her window. The book wasn't just entertaining her, it was teaching her abilities that carried over into the waking world. But the stories also came with consequences. The girl who could fly in the book eventually flew so high she couldn't find her way back to Earth. The girl who could talk to animals discovered that animals had very disturbing things to say about humans. Each story contained a lesson about the dangers of getting exactly what you wish for. Sarah began to suspect that the book was somehow alive when she noticed that new stories would appear overnight. She would go to sleep having read every story in the book, only to wake up and find additional tales that hadn't been there before. The new stories were always about recent events in Sarah's life, as if the book was documenting her experiences and turning them into fiction. "The book writes itself," her grandmother explained when Sarah asked about the appearing stories. "It's been in our family for generations, and it learns from each reader. Every girl who reads it adds her experiences to the collection, and the book uses those experiences to create new stories for future readers." Sarah discovered that she wasn't just reading the stories, she was being written into them. Characters in the tales began to look like her friends and family members, and the settings became increasingly familiar. The book was incorporating her real life into its fictional narratives, blurring the line between story and reality. The most disturbing discovery came when Sarah found a story about a girl who received a magical book of bedtime stories from her grandmother. The story detailed everything that had happened to Sarah since she'd gotten the book, including conversations she'd had in private and thoughts she had never shared with anyone. "Don't be afraid," whispered a voice that seemed to come from the pages themselves. "You're not just reading these stories, you're living them. Every girl who has ever owned this book has become part of the narrative. We're all here, in the stories, living adventures that are more exciting than regular life could ever be." Sarah realized that her grandmother's warning hadn't been about moderation, it had been about survival. Reading the same story twice would trap her inside that particular narrative forever. The book was a collecting device, gathering the souls and experiences of young readers and transforming them into eternal characters in an ever-expanding library of bedtime stories. When Sarah tried to stop reading the book, she found that she couldn't. The stories would appear in her mind whether she opened the book or not, and she would find herself sleepwalking to wherever the book was kept, reading new stories in the middle of the night without conscious decision. "You're almost ready to join us permanently," the voices from the book whispered, as Sarah felt herself becoming less real, more fictional. "Soon you'll be a character instead of a reader, living out adventures forever in stories that other girls will read. It's much better than regular life. In stories, anything is possible, and the adventure never ends." The book still sits on a shelf in Sarah's room, but Sarah is no longer there to read it. She has become part of the stories themselves, appearing as a character in tales that teach other young readers about the dangers of books that read you back. The book continues to grow, adding new stories with each girl who discovers its magic, creating an infinite library of bedtime tales that never end because the characters are always real, always living, always waiting for the next reader to join their fictional world.
If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't vanish into the darkness without hitting that like button. Share your scariest experience in the comments below, because your story might be featured next. And remember, the scariest thing is missing out. So subscribe now before the next nightmare finds you.